Hey, there we go, we're recording. All right, hello everyone. Today is Tuesday, September 4th, 2018, and this is the weekly Sig Docs meeting for Kubernetes. I am looking at our folks who are attending this meeting, and I notice only one who looks sort of vaguely familiar. Vlad, hello. Is this your first time with us, or are you? So, oh, welcome. So, glad to have you here.
Thanks.
Is there anything in particular that you are here for?
I was talking to Jennifer about like the focal bot that's running on the Kubernetes users channel, and I wanted to kind of share with everybody. Actually, I was talking to George earlier, and
this is my bad. I mean, this doesn't mean you can't talk about it, Vlad, but I forgot to add it to the agenda because last week was the week that I dropped all the balls. But I did mention it in Slack to the Sig Docs maintainers, so this shouldn't come as a complete surprise, I hope.
No, go for it.
Cool. Do you want me to go now, or do you want to go through the rest of the agenda and just add me to the end, or what do you want to do?
Well, how about let's add you to the well, since we're here, let's go ahead and go now, and we'll just bump the rest of the agenda.
Cool. So I don't know if you guys have kind of seen this thing around. So this is a bot that's been installed on the Kubernetes like users channel. I can't share a screen. Can you let me share a screen somehow? By any chance? Is that possible?
Yeah, let me see what I can do. Hang on.
So while you're doing that, so basically this is this bot that runs on the Kubernetes users channel and like a couple other channels. So what it's really doing is just monitoring conversations as people are asking questions. We try to find answers to those questions and automatically respond. So I can kind of give you a more concrete example of this in a second, but. So it's kind of two parts. One part is just people are asking questions. One of the things that we find is that like people don't know where to kind of find resources. Sometimes also people don't know who they should be asking questions, and also like what kind of things exist. So because of that, what we do is we have actually like automatic like detection of questions, so that if somebody, what often happens, somebody goes on the channel and says, "Hey everybody, how do I do this thing?" A lot of times those questions actually are left unanswered because maybe somebody's not paying attention or whatever. And the other side of that is ends up happening that like somebody keeps answering the same exact question over and over, while all the kind of more interesting questions or the unique questions are not necessarily answered. So what we do is we detect these questions and we send them references to either. So right now it's Kubernetes docs. So what we do is we went and scraped all of the docs, divided into sections, so that it's not like sending, like if somebody says, "How do I delete a pod?" It's not sending like the giant resource about like the kube controller, like what's it called, the command line reference. It's actually sending like the kind of small tidbit of like what actually needs to happen. So we're sending Kubernetes docs, we're sending Stack Overflow questions, and the third category is what we actually do is while people are having conversations. If somebody asks a question and another person answers it, what we'll do is we'll ask the person that's answering the question, like, "Hey, this looks very useful. Do you mind if we store it in the future?" And once the person kind of says, "Yes, it's cool, we can store it," then we'll kind of reiterate those same answers back to future people asking the same questions. Does that make sense to people so far? Does anybody have a question kind of about this?
So this is sort of a knowledge-centered support kind of approach. It's kind of interesting to me, actually. Do we ever clean up the answers from the answers in the chat may like span multiple lines, or there may be conversation interspersed, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, actually, great question. So a lot of what the bot does is actually trying to weave together conversations. Part of that, is that like, let's say there's two people having a conversation next to each other. What the bot does is it does identify like, okay, person A and B are talking over here, person C and D are talking over here. So we'll combine kind of all the text for A and B. So it tries to do that. It's not going to be perfect. It's still using some kind of like, it's still using like AI and, NLP in the background. So, but yeah, that's one of the goals, is actually to combine all the conversations, even if it's kind of like, kind of, even if the response to a question is like, 40 lines down, we'll try to find what was the person asking for? We try to track the conversation of like who's talking to who and what's most likely the question and answer and stuff.
Are you doing any kind of trend analysis about the sort of questions that people have a lot, so that we can maybe get a feedback loop going with documentation and with the project designers?
And this is why I'm here. Yes, so part of that has been trying to track kind of like, so I got some stats. I can just send this to an email if that's easier.
That would be so. I've updated the setting to allow screen sharing, but it won't take effect during this meeting.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'll send everybody like a link. I don't know if I'll reach out to you guys and see if there's an email that I can share to everybody or something. But so I found some kind of like, what are the most useful docs? What are the most useful questions? So far, because the longer term has been running for the questions that are kind of being re-answered, like the longest, thing that we've been kind of answering questions with is other previous Slack conversations. There's a lot more answers for that. But what's interesting is, for example, like the most commonly helpful question has been this, like, just how do I remove a pod? What's the kube control exec command to like remove a pod? And what people keep forgetting is like the little dash thing. So what's interesting is just like, I think what I'm kind of, why I'm here is to like talk to you guys about what this is, and also just to kind of open up some kind of like channel for like, well, how can we work together to, first of all, create the docs in such a way where they're a lot more maybe searchable by this thing, or maybe they're able to be broken down into small chunks, and so that they are servable to users, and then kind of vice versa, like what's some of the information that you guys would want. So, for example, the very small, easy thing is just in the kube control exec command, just highlight the fact that there needs to be a dash. That's basically like the very simple thing, because that question comes up like a whole bunch of times. I'll send this to you guys in a bit. Also, another interesting thing that might be kind of useful is so ever since this started, we've been kind of mostly answering with previous Slack conversations. We also added Stack Overflow questions. Most of the Stack Overflow stuff is somewhat useless. And actually, since we added Kubernetes, like the docs, ever since we added the scrape docs like a few weeks ago, that's been like rising up to the top in terms of like really, really useful stuff to people, which kind of to me is an indication that people aren't really just searching the docs, which maybe is, kind of like, is it a what's it called, search optimization thing, or is it just people don't know where to find it, or is it people just are lazy? I don't know. So I can send more of this stuff in a separate. I'll send you kind of like the report I have of some of the kind of interesting questions and stuff in a little bit.
Do you have any kind of sense about what people are trying to find information before they come onto Slack?
Oh, like if they're trying to find information before?
Yeah, like does anybody say like I tried blah blah blah, or do they just not try anything?
I think people do say in general like, hey, I've tried this. Because this is all like a bot, I can't read all the conversation, so probably people say something like that. So I haven't noticed. The one thing I was just thinking about is that like one potential thing we could do is to do something like a survey, right? So that when somebody answers, so right now when we answer a question for somebody, we say, hey, was this useful to you? Like, yes, this is useful, and answer my question, this was useful, or no, it's not useful. So what we can do is when somebody says, yes, this was useful, we can say, hey, do you want to fill out the survey? And we can ask questions like this, like, what did you try to search beforehand? Did you go to Google? Did you go to Docs? Did you go to like all these different sources? So I think it's something we can actually try to figure out.
I have a ton of questions too. So what I'm noticing is that we probably all are going to. So maybe this would be better to have like a dedicated conversation where we can hammer out some of the technical details and get be able to do some more deep dives. So Vlad, you're nodding, so it sounds like you're open to that. Excellent. So I will take an item to set up a time for Q&A, because yeah, I have a ton of, it sounds like lots of folks have lots of questions, so that's awesome. And yeah, I will set that up. And Vlad, I put also a link to our Kubernetes, the Kubernetes Sig Docs email in the Slack chat or Zoom chat, sorry.
Yep.
Okay, for now, however, let's move on and let's go to our agenda. And Vlad, feel free to stick around if you want. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining. And yeah, cheers. All right, so Zach Arnold, let's talk about 1.12 code freeze.
Righto. Hello, everyone. 1.12 has been very interesting, mostly because as I look here at the feature tracking spreadsheet, we had very, very aggressively high hopes for being able to stay really far ahead of like the entire PR queue. So we had this huge Airtable that has 129 PRs for this milestone. And we've done a pretty good job of parsing through most of them, but as it got closer and closer to Doc's deadline, which is today, turns out people weren't responding as quickly as I had anticipated. And I'm sure all of the previous Meisters are laughing because they knew that this was going to come. But anyway, optimism still pays off in most cases. There are 29 large features that are missing documentation, even placeholder PRs. I have received some input from Tim Pepper. We have managed to, out of the 63 now features that are supposed to be shipping, 42 of them need updates to documentation, and out of these 29, we have permission to hold them out of the milestone if they opt to not have any. Oh, I should send this feature tracking spreadsheet so you guys can see what I'm talking about, which is disappointing. So we will be, as Zach Corlesson's Slack status says, herding cats now for the better part of probably the next week. That does also mean that PR reviews are starting today. So if any of you have just a really big desire to review pull requests, I would welcome that effort. We really appreciate it. Tim and Jim, my two associates, have been doing an excellent job of wrangling and getting stuff done, and both of them have been extremely helpful in this effort. So I've appreciated what they've brought to the table. I think that Tim is on, but my guess is Jim is, oh no, he's there too. Awesome. So thank you both. I wanted to call that out explicitly. And I think that's it. Unfortunately, as I look at this list, I get nervous, but I think we'll be fine. I mean, worst comes to worst, they stop responding, and then I just be like, all right, peace. But I don't want to be that guy. So I will be reaching out on Slack, or rather, I will be writing something in a language to reach out for me on Slack and bother 29 people at the same time. And we will see if that more personal-ish approach gets more response. So for future release team people, I am documenting a lot of the code that I'm doing to automate my job. So I will be sharing that so people can use that with their own personal tokens, so that you can appear on GitHub commenting as you, and as well as reaching out to people on Slack as you, to people personally, which I have seen a much higher engagement rate than the general spam of when I send a somewhat personal message. So APIs and personal access tokens for the win. God, that was hard to say. All right, I'll be done talking now. Actually, are there any questions? I know the wonderful Jennifer Rondeau has agreed to help me with Kube ADM documentation, and I do appreciate that. I guess because of a personal interest.
Well, personal/day job.
Very nice.
What about the generated reference docs? What kind of shape is that in?
So I believe one of Jim or Tim, or maybe I had that wrong, we're taking a look at helping to fix some of the bugs that were in the generated reference documentation, so that we could actually use it as the commands actually specify in the KK repo. Tim or Jim, correct me if I had that super wrong and we did not agree on doing.
I think it was both of us, but I definitely saw a PR. Jennifer also is one who CC'd me in there, where there was a rework for the generation of the docs using Python instead of the current strategy. So I went through and tested that. It seemed to work. I'll send a link to the PR and the
Okay.
Jennifer, do you want to add anything?
PR, except toss it over to you, Jim. I looked at it and thought, okay, I do not have time. Somebody else is going to have to.
What generation tool is being revised?
This is Steve. I was pretty sure I put you on this PR also. Ching reworked the generation scripts, but I don't believe that this solves the kubelet problem.
Well, but for which docs? Are we talking about Kubernetes API or the components like Kube API server?
So I believe this tool grabs all of the generated docs, and you are included on there, so I'm not sure if you can click on the link in the chat there.
Okay, well, yeah, I can look, yeah.
And I went through and ran the Python script and saw what the output was, which is like the last comment on there, so you can kind of see what actually gets generated, but it's the command line tools, kubectl, setup tools for kubeadm. But as Jennifer's alluding to, I'm not sure if it fixes the overall problem or just a single subset of some of the issues we're seeing with docs generation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think fixing all the problems is an iterative thing. I mean, all the problems with the generated docs, not all the problems.
So I've been, my assignment here at Google has changed to focusing, pretty much all my time on Google Kubernetes engine instead of on the Kubernetes open source docs. So I'll be working less on the Kubernetes docs, but I think one thing I can offer to do is if anybody needs help getting, with ref docs generation, you can bring me into it because I've done it several times in the past.
I have a Google document that has a lot of the knowledge that you've written down. I was going to go start taking a look at it now. Well, not now, but in a week or so. And then I was probably going to bother you. So as long as you're still willing to be bothered, I'd be happy to do that. But I may have to confer with my compatriots first to make sure that what we have done with respect to the other fixing of generated docs bugs might address some of it.
Yeah. And Chi Ming has really been doing a lot of work on this. In fact, I'm starting to see him as the the primary person for those things that are in Kubernetes incubator, those generators that generate the Kubernetes API reference docs and the kube control commands. So I sort of thought of myself as the owner of that for a while, and I did work on it for a while, but as it turns out, I'm not going to have time to really sink into that. But it looks to me like he really is. He submits pull requests to Kubernetes incubator reference docs, and he seems to be taking it as one of his primary projects. So I see him as a key player going forward.
I will make sure to reach out to him then as well and make sure that we get that taken care of.
Awesome. And thank you, Steve, for all of the work that you have done so far on Kubernetes docs. We would not be where we are without all of your help over the years. So congratulations on your role evolving into its next step. And I'm going to mute the screaming voice inside me that says, please don't leave us. I'm
not muting mine. Don't leave us, Steve.
And just
so I will not leave you. I will still be at these meetings, and I will still do my PR wrangling when it comes around. And we'll do other odds and ends.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Zach, if folks are interested in reviewing PRs for 1.12, what's the best way to contact you with that willingness?
Slack, email, my cell phone number, any way that you need to get a hold of me, or just jump right in. You need zero permission from me. Permission has officially been granted. Basically, if I start seeing you comment on a PR, I will start to assume that you're probably owning it, unless, of course, there's no activity for several days, and then I'll take back over.
Sounds good.
Can I just call out a related thing? Because I did a relatively poor job of PR wrangling last week, but what I did do was to make sure that everything against master belonged against master. I did have to request that a couple of PRs get rebased against the 112 branch. So just a reminder to whoever's wrangling, you can't trust, trust and verify on, which branch the PRs are going in against. The other thing that I did was I went in and marked everything, including the ones I requested, with the 112 milestone, because it helped me sort so that I could focus on the ones against master insofar as I've done them last week. Sorry about that. I will try to help with PR wrangling generally this week, and especially the 112 ones, though, to make up for my remiss last week. But
Zach knows this already, but it's good to set the milestone on those, but there's also a way that you can query the PRs to see what branch they're against, and that is really a nice way to spot ones that are against 112. It's a little more reliable. Like, it doesn't fix the opposite problem where people base against the wrong thing, but it's more reliable than the milestone because not everybody knows to set the milestone, and if you don't get the syntax exactly right, it doesn't work.
Right. I mean, I was just calling out that as PR wrangler last week, I was trying to add the milestone too, but Misty's exactly right. You need to check both to filter for and to filter out.
Awesome. Let's see. Jennifer, anything I know you've got to go soon. Any last minute items for discussion?
Nope. That's it. I'll drop in just a couple here.
Okay. Thanks. All right. Let's move on. Zach Arnold recently returned from South Korea. You have you're bringing a proposal or an idea from the Korean translation team on how to do some automated branch syncing for long-running branches.
Right. Trying to think of. I actually was just recently sent this really wonderful presentation. I have no idea if this was a more elaborate proposal from them after we chatted, but a basic thought was, right now we struggle with the fact that there are two separate repositories. It was forked from the K website, so they do have the original initial Git directory, meaning their histories aren't diverged and they can be merged into one another in a very interesting fashion. But the problem lies in having two long-running branches in both repositories that need to stay synchronized in both places, without adding a lot of kerfuffle, to use a technical term, when it's being merged back into the base master branch in both repositories. This has definitely pushed my Git skills to their limit, because of thinking of different ways of being able to handle this. I've really not come up with anything better than, I think the best way to approach this is to find some tooling, or rather build. So this was kind of what ended up being the proposal. And I have no idea if Junyi had a better way of being able to present this, but basically we were thinking about almost a scenario that kind of the KK team does. So when it comes to release time, a branch is formally made from master, and then as pull requests are approved into that particular release, they are cherry picked out of the master branch into the release branch. And so I think in a similar fashion, when something is merged into master, it would be automatically cherry picked into the respective release branches for both repositories. And I didn't know if we wanted to do the other way sync, but basically coming up with similar tooling of being able to just take commits out of each master branch as they get merged so that these branches can stay in sync and that we're not having like a huge mess when we have to rebase everything, or we're trying like a merge commit strategy or some other different and possibly dangerous way of trying to merge in 287 commits before we want to add one commit, and then we have a merge conflict and it's a mess.
So before we dive into this discussion, I'm going to note that we have, looking at our agenda, we also have a proposal from Luke to talk about on updating, or an update on the tooling and infrastructure working group. There's a proposal document there. So we've got about a half hour left. Take care, Jennifer, thank you. We've got about a half hour left. So I want to poll folks like either up or down. Do folks want to get more into the particulars of this branching strategy proposal now? Do we want a chance to look over this doc and talk about it later? So I guess let's make that the choice between deep dive now or deep dive later.
Interestingly enough, I'd like to point out Misty also has a branching strategy proposal that she and I chatted about down on the list as well. So
mine does not have anything to do with localization. It's not even considering the localization at all. So,
but it may have to be taken into consideration if the strategy is deemed appropriate to be able to find a way of being able to do the localization effort.
So what I hear though is that the way that we handle our own branching strategy in K website may have an impact on localization repositories.
Well, it does for sure already. So as soon as a commit is merged into the release 112 branch, the localization team needs to take it into their own dev 112 branch, translate it, update their own dev 112 branch, and then finally issue a pull request against our master branch when 112 is ready to go for the Korean docs.
Okay, so in that case, I'm going to say let's branching in some in toto and also in very specific parts. Do we want to talk about this now? Thumbs up, or later? Thumbs down. Now, later.
it's going to take the rest of the meeting if we talk about it now.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Which
So
is more timely and critical? Which one do we need to? Which one's been waiting in the queue longer?
Well, mine has been sort of being promised for a while, like ever since before 111. But if we go with a cherry pick strategy, that would also kind of solve the problems that I'm trying to solve in a different way.
I'd say we go to Luke and then we can kind of chat about this afterwards. Mostly because he looked like he was really excited to present and he was vehemently thumbsing down.
Does that sound good? Luke, can we go over your proposal and then return to branching?
Yeah, sure. I wouldn't say vehemently. I just
Sorry.
wanted to know more.
Strong idea is loosely held. It's okay.
Okay. Yeah. So if y'all look in the chat, you'll see a link to a Google Doc. This is something that was collaborated on by myself, Andrew Chen, and Raji over the last week or so. This is still, very much a work in progress in terms of how this group is going to work. But if you all want to have a look, and I've opened it to the public, so anybody can make comments if necessary. If you all would like, I could give a little bit of a spiel now, or you all can just look at the doc or whatever. But I just wanted to bring it up in the meeting and let people know that this is an effort going on.
I think a short intro or just like a short overview would be helpful.
Sure. Over the last several weeks and months, the content of this meeting has tended to split up into two tracks. So on the one hand, we've been talking a lot about internationalization, about how we can get help and volunteers from people, basic content strategy, things like that. And I think to me, intuitively, that feels like the right thing that we should be talking about in this very precious meeting time every week. And on the other hand, we've been having a lot of issues with Hugo and Netlify and continuous integration and things of that sort. And I thought it might be good to gather a small nucleus of people who can focus on that and keep it out of everybody else's hair, to put it somewhat diplomatically. So that was the basic impetus behind this proposal. And if you look there, I'm proposing a handful of, I guess you could say, core competencies for the group. So the static site generation side of things, the Netlify hosting side of things, continuous integration, site performance and optimization, and SEO. So it's kind of, it's not everything that's not tech writing, but I think it's pretty close. So that's my basic my little spiel there. In terms of the process and how it's all going to work pragmatically, that's still under discussion, I would say. But the proposal does provide at least a kind of baseline picture of how that might look.
So what are next steps? Like what action needs to be taken from here?
That's a good question. So down at the bottom of that doc, there's a section called process where I suggest what I call an initial baseline of what those next steps could be. So a Slack channel, potentially setting up a weekly update here in the Sig Docs meetings that can act as a two-way communication channel on this set of issues. And the third is very simple, that we could potentially have a separate GitHub tag that people can add to issues in PR that can send up the bat signal to whichever handful of folks are working in this domain.
So it sounds like maybe the first step is getting folks who are interested to contact you.
Yeah. So last week I mentioned the group in the issue, and actually got Raji as a volunteer. So it looks like there's three of us right now that have signed on. The three. I don't know Raji well personally, but I know that Andrew and I are people who are very very keen about about some of these issues that are maybe a little bit more arcane and dry to other people. I personally love build tools and static site generators and things. So for people that don't, this is your opportunity to maybe stop worrying about these things. So we'll see.
And Zach,
I super love this and want to be involved in any way possible. I love building code that does stuff for that.
All right, Zach, we are kindred spirits. we are two doves.
It was my goal during this release cycle to find a way to automate myself out of a job, but it's not working.
Cool. Well, glad to have you on board. Anybody else is more than welcome, of course.
Yeah, I would love to be adjacent, if not directly involved.
You got it.
All right. Anything more on the infrastructure working group, Luke?
Nope, that's it for now.
Just awesome. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much. It's really awesome to have folks who are dedicated to taking this on as a practice area. So thank you for taking this initiative.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, truly.
Awesome. All right. So back to the agenda. So we've got branching stuff to talk about, but Misty, why don't you talk about your role change first?
Okay, some of you probably know this already, but I am going to be taking on the role of tech lead for GKE Docs, which is also going to be limiting the amount of time that I'm able to dedicate to the open source side of things right now. Just like Steve, I'm not going away. I'll still be doing PR wrangling. I'll still be available for other stuff. I'll be in the Slack channel. I'll be in these meetings, maybe not every one. So this is just kind of an expectation reset, I suppose. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope that, yeah, I think it's going to be fine.
Awesome. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And so will you still be available for questions on Git that may or may not be tinged with hysteria in the moment?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, that office hours thing is still open. Like if anybody has questions about Git, let me know. If I can't help you synchronously, then we can set up a time. It seems to be that one-on-one works better for these kind of things because almost every problem is sort of unique in its own way until you, like, they're not really unique to me, but they're unique to the people experiencing them because maybe your mental map of Git is just not fully filled out in that area. You have some blurry tiles. But I think like overall we have already gotten better as a group, and I think we will continue to get better as a group. I'm also not the only one in the group who knows a lot about Git. So among all of us, I think we'll be able to muddle through.
Awesome. I'd like to retroactively banish the word hysteria from polite conversation and use panic instead. All of my Git queries are sort of inevitably tinged with panic. So glad that you will be still available to talk me down out of my Git panic tree. But yeah, awesome. Congratulations again, and thank you for being willing to continue as a subject matter expert.
I'm just still really excited that I was able to help out with the contributor guide and some of the other stuff that I've done. I feel like at least the things that I've done so far maybe have had a broader impact, like a helpful impact. That's kind of what I would like to see.
Yeah, your contributions have been real and valuable, so thank you. All right, we've got 21 minutes left. Let's get branchy.
So yeah. I have a feeling that my proposal is a little bit simpler than the localization workflow. So I wonder if we want to talk about my proposal first, just so that Zach can poke holes in it, because now he's thinking about the localization stuff too. I have a feeling that my approach will not be durable to the localization question.
That seems reasonable. I noticed that in the agenda you have a link to a proposal. That doc appears to be locked.
Oh, I did the shareable link thing. I wonder if I'm not able to do the shareable link for people outside of Google or something, because I did specifically share it to Zach. Maybe I can share it to Sig Docs, the email list. Let me see. Sometimes we have kind of funny extra rules on us about what we're allowed to share where. Let me try this. And in the meantime, I can kind of just talk about it because it's not anything very earth-shattering.
Sounds good.
So it's kind of a little bit of a throwback to what we as a SIG were doing before I did 111, because it's effectively a merging strategy. I have shared that doc with the group now, so anybody who's on that email alias may be able to get access to it, hopefully, maybe. So my objectives were, when I developed this, and I developed this in collaboration with Zach and also somebody in Google called Gabe Weiss, who is like a branching strategy expert. He actually used to work at Perforce before, and he gave me a lot of consultation on this. So we wanted to make it easier to understand, for contributors to understand where to put their pull requests. We wanted to allow for continuous improvement in the currently published docs, which means putting things in a place where they're going to get published right away. That is part of our pattern as a docs team, which also means that we have a whole lot more pull requests per release than something like KK has, because we do a whole lot of different sizes of fixes, I guess, to put it mildly. And we also want to have the ability to have release branches where we're putting release specific stuff so that it doesn't accidentally leak out into the published docs before it's actually available. And we want to have the ability to have feature branches for other long-running work, things like site redesigns and some of the CI/CD work that Luke and Zach have been talking about. So those things should probably be segregated from the main docs until they are ready to be rolled out. So those are our strategies. Right now, what we have is something like broadly applicable fixes go into master, release work goes into a branch called release 112, or whatever the release is at that time, and those get reconciled by master being merged into the release branch periodically. We also can do the same thing for feature branches, but I feel like when we've used feature branches in the past, we've actually let the feature branches get fairly out of date, which means a whole lot of backloaded work at the end reconciling it. And right now we also have this weird situation with archive branches where we're reusing the pre-release feature branch for the release work also as the archive branch, which means that there's like a whole cycle where technically that release branch should be matching master 1-for-1 all the time, but we never actually go and update those, the release branches. So even like during the time that 111 is current, the 111 release branch is stale because nobody's going and maintaining that. So my proposal sort of addresses some of those things. So one of the things that I think that we should be doing is we should be using a different branch name for pre-release and post-release. So I think that, I mean, this is going to sound silly because it's just naming, but I think that when we have a release branch, it should be called dev dash whatever, and then that development branch kind of becomes dead, or we could actually delete it once the branch is released, which means merging that branch into master. So once that branch is merged, it either gets deleted or it just like stays there and nobody uses it anymore. And then at the time that a new release is going to happen, then there needs to be an archive release cut from master at the time right before the release happens that represents like the final state of that release before we start referencing a new one in master. So like before 113 comes out, we need to cut a branch called release 112, and that's the archive branch for 112. So what else is involved here? It's basically the same kind of maintenance cycle would happen for feature branches where master got merged into the feature branch on a regular basis to keep it up to date. So then at the time that the feature needed to be released, effectively the only difference between master and the feature branch would be the commits relevant to the feature. So I won't go over the mechanics of this now. It's a lot like what you guys had before, except that there's an extra branch thrown in, but I do outline the mechanics in the proposal doc. And I also talk about why it's better than what we have now, because it may seem kind of subtle, the differences to what we have now. But at least to my mind, and as somebody who fairly recently ran a release, it makes more sense to me. So that's pretty much it.
The only question I had was, I assume now with Luke and what we'll be doing in the infrastructure side, I didn't really see a lot of places where there would be a long running dev branch that had anything other than release related stuff. But I did like the renaming at the end and how we kind of just let it go. I thought that was really good. So
I mean, there could be a time where somebody is working on a feature that is going in, like we're working on 112 right now, it's pre-release, but somebody could be working on a feature that's going to go into 113, and they could already want to have a place to put that.
Gotcha.
And
okay.
Or when we did the big site redesign, and I think that there's another site redesign coming, at least I've seen some reference to that. I'm not involved in that at all. But that sort of thing should go in a feature branch that effectively has all the same stuff as master, if nothing else, just for smoke testing of the feature. That's my opinion. There's also a place for tagging in this. Like tags should happen anytime that we officially release something, or anytime that we decide that we're retiring something, or things like that. Like tags are like bookmarks that are not editable, but it's a place and time.
Yeah, we do use tags now, but only like as like end of release and beginning release markers. There's definitely more room to use them more strategically. Just looking over this really quickly, I think I need to spend more time with this proposal, but I think your assessment of we're using like release branches as both archival and occasionally as development branches for like release specific updates. That has never worked especially well. It's always been kind of there's a reason why we have designated like prior release branches as archival, and yet that doesn't change the fact that occasionally work has to go into them. So I think that makes sense to approach.
I think it's a little bit confusing the way that we are dual purposing them, and I think that just such a subtle thing as having a name change can maybe communicate something. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. Like people don't really read. Like we have the pull request template, and human nature, there's something about human nature where people seem to not think that the instructions are for them, or they're in too much of a hurry. I don't know what the motivations are. We probably can't dock ourselves out of this, and we're probably going to still keep telling people to rebase against the right branches. Cherry picking would also work though. Like just to sort of transition to Zach's thing, if there was a bot that was automatically cherry picking, there would be some cases where the cherry pick would fail and somebody would have to manually intervene, because there's
Right.
like, especially metadata stuff is going to always be different in the release branches. It's going to be ahead. Like the variables that talk about what release this is and things like that, they're going to be ahead of master, and that sometimes makes merging hard.
So, I mean, in general, anything that goes towards more automation, and I guess, that's what Zach was going to talk about, automation and cherry picking. That to me, I know it's harder and more work, but that to me seems like we'll have less headaches in the future, because I know this seems simpler to you, but just hearing how it was described, you have different people who come and contribute at different levels of understanding. And my concern would be that there are a certain group of folks that this approach might cause more havoc for. I don't know if that's true or not, but at least we were kind of simple. Hey, you put everything into master, and unless it's something that has to wait until it goes in the next release, and that's what's in our contributor guide. And when I read that, I was like, oh, I'm able to understand that. So I just put it in master unless I can't have this show up until the release, in which case I go put it in the release branch. So I am curious to hear about the techniques that would involve more automation and possibly cherry picking. I think that has the opportunity for less errors by, I don't know, folks that are newer to our world who with the best intentions are going to get themselves into trouble.
Yeah, currently the release manager role is a pretty technical role as far as understanding about Git.
Yeah.
And anything that would democratize that role and allow more people to participate in it is better for the project overall.
Yeah, it's Zach. Does this make a good segue to talk about cherry picking as it relates to, or your cherry picking proposal for keeping localization branches in sync, and how nicely or not it would play with this proposal?
Anything that allows me to talk is a great segue. So really, like when it comes to, because like as a normal process, merging, it makes perfect sense. But when I started thinking about, now we have 2 repositories and technically 4 long-running branches, a master in both places and a release branch in both places, and they all need to have some level of synchronization. Unless you can have something that's granular enough or automatic enough that can get to the commit level and make these decisions, I think you run into a problem where you stand and like we were looking at like what it would take to quickly fast forward the Korean Dev 112 branch to release 112, and it was 278 commits. And I stood there and I was like, I can't in good conscience say just go ahead, go. It could be fine. So my thought was, if we created some tooling around just basically, hey, if there is a branch of this regular expression, dev 112, dev dash number dot number, and there's another branch in the other repository that's of the same, that matches that, then perform a two-way sync. And that is because, like, what if it was just copying the K website stuff into the Korean localization, we'd be fine, but it isn't. Right. We have to take their stuff into our release 112 branch and then eventually merge into master, because Kubernetes.io points to K website and its its netlified amazingness. So
can I interrupt for a second?
You may interrupt as often as you want.
There's also another thing, because when their commit comes back into our branch, I think it goes into a different directory. Like their files in our branch are under /ko instead of /en.
Right.
So that is going to need like another commit on top of their work to move their files to the right place. So it's not exactly a clean cherry pick there.
Well, let me check the
unless they also have it in KO in there.
That's what I was going to go check that really quickly. I want to say they did. Oh,
yeah, if they don't, they should.
Yeah, that would be so much better if they did, because then it actually
they do.
It probably wouldn't ever have a conflict with our English content then, which means it would be even easier.
So I have to confess, I fell asleep last night thinking about this, and like thinking about the merge tree structure, and thinking about how many possibilities for conflict there would be between syncing English content going one way from K website into --docs --star, and how much conflict would be coming back from a localization repo. And like, if it seems like if we have a good practice with localization repos setting upstream, like we can do syncs relatively easily, but it's still manual work. It's not automated work.
Just a thought.
They could have changes to their layouts and stuff that are required, that are language specific things as well. And maybe that Hugo has accommodation for that. Like maybe it can have language specific layouts. I don't know, but that's another thing.
That's what Bjorn is working on right now. So that's just for contextual awareness. That's the long running feature branch that Bjorn Pedersen is working on right now. That may go in at any, depending where he drops it, may go in either 1.12 or 1.13. But yeah, working on how to separate that out cleanly and make it possible for localization teams to have localization specific layouts falls in the scope of the work that he's doing. But I'm sorry, Zach, we have interrupted you like willy-nilly, so please.
His okay. I was just, as a thought, what about something like we could do Git submodules where we had like the content/KO directory could be its own Git repo. And then that way you've effectively abstracted out all of the stuff, the configuration, the nonsense that, well, not nonsense, but the stuff that we need to be able to generate the full website. And then that itself could be technically a parent Git repository for 3 submodules: the Chinese documentation, the EN documentation, and the Korean documentation. And then you kind of effectively split out what is the content versus what is the stuff required to generate the website. It does make it complicated from a perspective of contributing. Only kind of, though, because you've effectively separated that which is Markdown from that which is your Docker and build tooling and all of that good stuff. And then those histories can be as separate as they want. And then we can pull in at a particular release exactly which Git SHA from this particular repository we want as the stamped, this is now the new master of the parent repository, build it, and that's now Kubernetes.io.
I think I see where you're going with it, but there's nothing about the current setup that prevents us from doing that anyway.
That's what I was saying. Like, would that be an effective alternative? Rather than forking the entire repo and having separate localization repos, instead make Git repositories of each of the content / language particular directories.
Sure. So there are some problems with that, namely, so what you would be talking about would be taking like from the top level content / KO, for example, and having that be a separate repo.
Right.
But Hugo requires like /static. In order for like Hugo server to run in the local environment, it requires the whole kit.
Right. So that's why I was talking about it as a submodule. So Git submodules are well, interesting, but you can essentially copy down the K website repo, and then if you change directory into a subdirectory of K website, namely content KO, you're technically in another Git directory, which can have a separate remote. So you can update all day long from that remote without affecting the base history of K website at all. And they can be in separate origins, they can be in different places, and then you can have separate histories and different configuration and whatnot. And then, basically all config lives in the K website repo and static, generated assets, CSS, all that good stuff. But then all language specific implementation details in terms of markdown files and content live in the individual Git directories of the languages themselves. Actually, the more I say that, the more I like it.
Can we do a proof of concept? Because I know that I've seen submodules go horribly wrong in the past from like a contributor perspective, from people not knowing the Git commands to work with them and stuff. And I wonder how it is in the UI.
And I would also like to see.
I've never tried it.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I would like to see a proof. If we do a proof of concept, I'd like to see one that acknowledges the abstraction work that Bjorn is doing with like site-wide strings, because I don't think those are going to fit nicely into the /content / structure. So yeah, just something that is opaque to that branch rather than, opaque to that branch rather than blind to it. That didn't make any sense. I English for a living. Something that acknowledges the feature branch that Bjorn is doing rather than pretends it doesn't exist.
Okay. Yep, I have not seen that, so I'll have to go check that out. But other than that, my two best proposals are that, which I just came up with right now, and cherry picking, which is just picking the individual commits, which shouldn't be a problem because they aren't in affected directories. But anytime there's a config change in like a netlify.toml, I understand time's running out, so you'll cut me off. But that will cause a conflict.
Sure. So just as a point of order, we are at time, but do we want to defer this to, do we want to push this back a week and talk about it next week in weekly meeting? Do we want to set up a separate meeting to like do more deep dive into branching strategy? Do folks have a preference? My own sort of base preference would be to keep this transparent in the weekly meeting, but I also know that this is not going to get, this conversation could go a lot longer than an hour. So I don't know inherently whether it's going to be of a benefit to keep it visible at the weekly meeting level. Actually, the more
it should be in the test and infra meetings,
Yeah,
and then,
actually, this is
and then reported back to here, because already it's gone to a point where I don't feel like I can contribute to the discussion because it's gone to a point that is past my understanding, and I'd have to do some heavy studying to even participate. So I kind of feel like it should go to a smaller group, and then that group could report back to us.
I wonder if that smaller group could recruit some participants from SIG testing or another group of subject matter experts who are not in our SIG, who may know more about the pitfalls.
It's a good idea.
That is a really good idea. Luke, how do you feel about having the infrastructure working group tackle translation flows?
Here's your first hornet's nest.
Does that, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds good to me. I think that the core imperative of the group is basically to get just clear a path where ordinary contributors don't have to deal with this kind of thing. So yeah, that strikes me as being well within purview.
Okay. Then I would say let's set up a working group meeting specifically to talk more about branching strategy. And then we can report back to the weekly meeting with what we find.
Okay, cool. And I can add that to the doc that I sent around as well.
Perfect. All right. Thanks everyone for your patience and your willingness to stick around. This is the real stuff. So awesome. I think that's everything on the agenda. Well, it has to be whether we're there or not. So, all right, everyone, thanks very much. Have a good week. Take care.